It looks like we have a pretty good amount of people that have already joined. So I think I'll get started with just some of our very, very introductory things. If you are with us today, thank you for spending some time with us. You're hopefully here because you're interested in learning more about the Housing Opportunity Planning grants. Many of you may know that this is a grant program that has already been happening for a couple of years, but we just received a second round of funding. And so this session is really to help people learn more about the new round of funding and what the application process is going to be like, and how decisions will be made and all the fun stuff to get folks hopefully prepared for applying. We're going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. When you logged in, it probably told you we are recording this meeting. So we'll be posting that to the program website as well as sharing it with folks who registered for this meeting. We do ask that everyone stay muted, and actually, unless you're one of the speakers, if you could keep your camera off for now, unless you're asking a question towards the end. We would appreciate it. And throughout the presentation, if you do have questions related to what we are talking about in the moment, please put your questions into the chat. So we will be monitoring that. There should be time at the end for more Q&A. So some questions we might wait to answer. We might hold off on them towards the end, but we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can while we're all here together. And if you could just take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. Who are you? What is your position in your community, if you're a community that's thinking about possibly applying for a grant? And what community are you representing or maybe zooming in from? We would definitely like to ourselves know who's here, but also just sharing with each other. Thanks for kicking it off, Beth. That's great. This is our agenda for this, noon time. Hopefully you're all have a little lunch with you while you're with us. We're going to go over the program. We're going to do a little bit of hopefully or possibly just introducing you to what Housing Academy is, but some of you may already be aware of it if you are already a grantee. We'll go over what the actual application is going to be asking for, where to find the application, all the fun stuff, and then what the evaluation process, the award, decision and award process looks like, and the timeline. We'll probably mention timelines more than once because that's one of the most important things for anyone who's looking to apply. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll have some Q&A at the end. If you're just joining us now, please continue to introduce yourselves, but in the chat, but also you can ask questions in the chat as we're presenting. If you have a question like while we're speaking, we'll do our best to monitor that. And we'll also, some of those questions we might hold till the end. It really kind of depends on what sort of things come through. So here are your speakers today. Myself, I'm the director of Plan New Hampshire. We've been doing the grants administration for this program for about the 2 years the program's been happening. George Regan from New Hampshire Housing, Sarah Reitzman from New Hampshire Housing, and Sue Cagle from UNH Cooperative Extension. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves when they're, speaking about their slides, but I just want to let you know who you can expect, and you can probably see it. We have our cameras on, so you can see us, and we'll each be, excuse me, taking different portions of the presentation. So for now, I'm going to hand it off to George, who is going to start with just a program overview.
Thanks very much, Tiffany, and good afternoon, everyone. So glad to see so many people here interested about learning about the additional funding we have for what we call the InvestNH Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program, or known as HOP grants. I just wanted to kind of go back a little bit in some history that I think has been helpful in how we got to actually organize and this grant program that BEA has sort of entrusted New Hampshire Housing and these plan partners to put together. But many years ago, you might remember the community planning grant that we had was a little over $1 million. And it was to help provide consultants for all manner of things in people's communities, not just housing, but like bike pedestrian paths, all sorts of things. And UNH Department of Extension was part of that partnership in talking about community engagement. And that's when we really realized how important community engagement is. And Sue's going to talk a lot more about that. But when that ended, we partnered with Plan New Hampshire and had a really small program called the Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program. And really, the foundation of that program is really part of the bones of this HOP grant program. And so I just want to sort of lift up that relationship and partnership with Plan New Hampshire as we sort of dealt on a much smaller scale with communities that were trying to look at land use regulation change that was focused on housing. And so, fast forward to this grant program that many of you know is part of the $100 million InvestNH initiative. There's many other elements to it. Our element was the $5 million for planning and zoning. And essentially, all that money got obligated, which was a great thing. We weren't sure how many communities might be interested. We've got sort of 63 communities getting HOP grants, so technical assistance grants. And also we had a community housing navigator program, 5 housing navigators working in different communities across the state, trying to help communities come together and talk about housing. The whole focus of the program is really to move forward in trying to deal with the housing crisis that we face in New Hampshire. You'll see there that there's the map of the grantees. So they are sort of located all around the state. And the hope with this program is that we continue to have some more dots filled in. So we look forward to kind of talking more about that with you. And thank you. And really what the program is about is similar for those of you that are existing HOP grantees. It's essentially the same elements. So the program, we got 2.9 million additional allocation. So that's really the good news. So we used up the 5 million. We were hoping for some more, and now 2.9 million came our way. And I have to say that because of the timing, we thought we might get that earlier. There's about 12 or so communities that we conditionally granted up around $600,000. So those that were sort of waiting for this additional appropriation has been adjudicated and received some of that money. So with the 2.9, we don't still have that whole amount yet because we're using some of it for those communities that were waiting for the additional funding. But it's really to look at any of these or a mix of these relevant master plan updates, so anything that's sort of related to the housing chapter, land use vision, and even water and sewer as it relates to capacity for building housing. It can also be used for housing needs assessment or analysis. And then the auditing of land use regulations, which is a lot of communities have been using to figure out what is getting in the way of housing production. And then development of land use regulations as well. So that's really the hope, is that communities can find an opportunity to use these grant monies where they are. This grant program is open to grantees HOP grantees that already received an initial round of grantees of funding, and then also for new ones. I do want to sort of highlight here before we move on is that because of the amount of money and the interest, certainly these are going to be very competitive grants. And I think it's going to be so, and Sarah will get into this later, so important to really kind of talk about and defend what you need in terms of money for the work that you're trying to do, and really think about it from a good stewardship perspective, because we'd like it to be able to cover as many potential existing HOP grants and new grantees as possible. You'll hear that the grant limit is $100,000 per applicant, and we're hoping that you're thoughtful about how much you're going to really need. We do have some grantees in this round when we end in July 31 that'll be returning money. We had a really fast start last year, so we were all, including municipalities, trying to figure things out. We hope with this orientation webinar and just the time before the September 30 deadline to submit applications, that there's time to be thoughtful and maybe engaging a consultant and really putting together a good application. Yeah, and also just want to mention that, you may all be aware of the Housing Champions program, and we sort of think, and BEA does too, that depending on what you're doing in this grant program, it should really be helpful in assisting you to become eligible for the Housing Champion designation. So with that, the program overview is overseen by a steering committee. This is an excellent group of people that have been in existence. So it's not just the Plan New Hampshire Cooperative Extension you see, but certainly Office of Planning and Development. So the Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority, and then the Hampshire Municipal Association. So it's been a really committed group of people that not only put thoughtful consideration and time into adjudicating grants, but also along the way and trying to make sure that we're dealing with issues and challenges that popped up along the way. So it's great to have that team and to still have that team in existence today. And so with that, if there aren't any questions, I'm not seeing any that are popping up. I'm happy to turn it over to Sue Cagle from UNH Cooperative Extension to talk about a really important program, Housing Academy, and its importance in your work and community engagement as you figure that aspect out in your application.
Great, thank you, George. Somebody let me know if for whatever reason you can't hear or see me. But I am Sue Cagle with UNH Cooperative Extension, and we're really excited to be part of this program, have been since the beginning. And we just wanted to take a couple of minutes today to talk about where Housing Academy fits in the overall implementation of grants and the grant application. And as George alluded to earlier, the importance of community engagement. The program really focuses on identifying local solutions that are going to have local support and be meaningful. The solution's not going to be the same for every town. So why is there this thing called Housing Academy? Some of you are familiar with it. I see some familiar names here. Some of you may have gone to it when we did it last year. But the idea is really that the Housing Academy is providing a few different things to communities that are part of the HOP grant program. First of all, it's an opportunity to really bring together those communities that are involved in the HOP grants to build some common language and understanding, real conversations around where did the housing crisis come from? How did it develop? How did we get here? Where are we today? As a group together, so that as we're talking about moving forward, there's that common language and understanding. It's a very strong focus on engagement. And as you'll look at your application, and Sarah will get into this more later, the idea of building a engagement plan and engagement strategy is a really critical part of the HOP program. Housing Academy is really designed to help you with that process. So the goal would be that within the first 6 months of your grant process, you'd be attending this, some members of your community, and working through really building a robust engagement plan for your community. So we'd be working on building skills. And then also by bringing everybody together to do this work, it's also creating a lot of connection between your communities so that you can share experiences, resources, lessons learned, tools you develop, etc. And we can share that from the first round of HOP grants, that has really been valuable, I think, to a lot of communities to just have that connection with each other, which has been really important. So Tiffany, we can move on to the next one. So what is it and why are you going and who should go? For those of you that are applying in September, for the September deadline, we would hold a round of Housing Academy January to March of 2025. It is typically 4 sessions. The first one is introductory kind of overview. We do that virtually. Then we have 2 in-person sessions where we come together for a chunk of the day and really dive deeply into what is the work, what does it look like, what are lessons learned. You get to hear from other communities that have been doing work of what has worked and not for them, to hopefully save you some time and energy as you go. It's very interactive. It's very practice focused. It's not sitting there and just listening to people all the time. And we really encourage you, if your community is awarded a HOP grant, to really think about who should go. There should be one person at least from each community that receives a HOP grant who attends, but we recommend ideally 2 or 3, and including some of those community volunteers that are part of your work, because that's going to help you really build your capacity to do the work moving forward. But it really is up to you and your community to decide who is going to take on that role and move forward with attending Housing Academy. And there are stipends available, and again, we can get into more detail about that later. So that for community volunteers who attend, we want to make sure that there's not a barrier for them to participate in the program, to help cover their costs to participate. And we can move on to the next one. Great. And just so you know that it doesn't end with that core program. The core program is that, 4 sessions that every community attends and sends people to. But what we've also been developing based on feedback from the first round of people who went through the program and communities is an ongoing series of trainings and events. Technical assistance is available to all of your communities to help support you with your engagement plans as you move forward. That's going to come from our UNH Extension team. We can really help you with developing and identifying what are some of the best strategies for that outreach and engagement in your community on a more one-to-one level. We've created an online platform that allows communities to share information and resources as we move forward. And also have been doing a series of community visits, some of them virtual, some of them in person, to go to communities around the state and learn what they're doing, what's worked, what hasn't so far, and see some really unique and interesting examples of housing efforts, which has been helpful for communities to then take back and see what they can apply at home. So that's the basics of Housing Academy. I know that was a quick overview. Myself and our Housing Academy team are available to answer additional questions. We'll give you our contact information later. But if there's any questions, Alyssa, I don't see anything in the chat right now, but if I've missed anything, let me know if there's anything we should address right now. Otherwise, I will pass it on to Sarah to talk more about the application process and the components.
Great, thank you, Sue. So before you apply, know that the HOP grant program available to all New Hampshire cities and towns, as well as village districts that have zoning authority. So we have a village district, Little Boar's Head, that had a HOP grant in the first iteration of the program. So you don't have to be a city or town to apply necessarily. Municipalities that have received a HOP or a Community Housing Navigator grant in the past are eligible to apply. And in fact, in some way, we're prioritizing those communities, which Tiffany will explain later when we talk about the timeline for approvals. Applicants may request no more than $100,000. That includes 5% for grant administration that is going directly to the community, not to the consultant. And that's not broken into buckets. So however, there's a lot of former or current HOP grantees on this call. This is probably the most important for you all to understand, is that we did do away with the phases. And so you're able to apply for $100,000 and make a combination of the sort of approved activities. So George mentioned already that the funds are to be used to hire a consultant to work on the following. So relevant master plan updates, doing a housing needs assessment or analysis as part of a larger project, doing an audit of your land use regulations, maybe looking for where those barriers are and examining your zoning corresponding recommendations, and then developing new or revising your land use regulations. Next slide, Tiffany. Application process. So the materials are available at nhopgrants.org. Scroll over to HOP grants up in the top bar. The application instructions and guidelines are there, as well as the budget template that you'll be required to use. So please review the application instructions carefully, even if you've already received a HOP grant in the past, because we have made changes to the process, including that budget template is new, doing away with the phases is new, and the way we're handling administration is new. Next slide, Tiffany. Perfect. So the application process, you're going to submit your application as a PDF to info@nhopgrants.org. That's also a great email address for you to use if you would like to submit questions before you apply. You're welcome to drop your specific questions about how to apply in the chat now, but you're also welcome to send us an email. That'll include a cover page, and we list out what should be on that cover page. It'll include an application narrative, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We'd like to know if you already have in mind who you'd like to send to Housing Academy, their name and their contact information. We're asking for a letter of support from both the planning board and either your select board, town council, board of aldermen, your local governing body for every applicant, as well as, of course, a scope of work and timeline. What are you going to do with the grant? How long is it going to take? Budget and of commitment from the consultant if you know which consultant you're going to be working with. And applications are due by the end of September 2024. So you have about 2 months to get those applications together. The application narrative will include your housing challenge. Tell us what's going on in your community. We know everybody's got their own concerns in their community, whether it's that they need more, downsizing options for seniors to get into, whether they need more starter homes, they're thinking about getting young families in their community, whether the concern is about something like short-term rentals. So tell us what the housing challenge is in your community, how you know, and what your project goals are. What would you like to achieve? Tell us about the outcomes and deliverables in that application narrative. What are you going to produce as a result of this? We're looking for a little bit of proof of readiness. Like if you're applying to change your zoning, how do you know that your community is ready for that? And we give some specific examples in the application about how to sort of demonstrate readiness, and the letter of support from the planning board and the governing body help with that too. Is this application, is your project consistent with local or regional plans? Can you point to your RPC's regional housing needs assessment or a master plan in your community or something like that? And then Sue talked about this a little bit, but the application narrative also includes a little bit of your engagement plan, and that doesn't have to be perfect, but some idea of how are you planning on including feedback from the community? How are you planning on engaging the community? We're going to help you flesh out that plan. You're going to learn a lot in Housing Academy. You get the technical assistance from UNH Cooperative Extension, and you'll submit as part of your grant project an updated or revised community engagement plan. I think we did 6 months into the project. So like by next May, you'll be giving us a new community engagement plan with all of the lessons learned in Housing Academy and through the technical assistance. But we'll ask for some sort of plan right in the application of what are you thinking about doing with community engagement? What do you know works well in your community? What have you done in the past that's been successful? Next slide. Perfect. This is the budget template. You'll find this on the website. So required to submit provided budget with their grant. All grantees will receive 5%. Again, that's for the municipality to administer the grant. That administration is separate from whatever asking for. So this is not money for the consultant, but instead for the community. When you request reimbursement for it, it'll be a simple choice. And this is actually going to calculate that automatically, which is great because that was one of the #1 things that we ran into with the last iteration of HOP grants was differences in how that sort of administration money was being calculated. George spoke to this a little bit in thinking about being good stewards of this money. We know that we don't have enough to serve the needs of the state. We anticipate that we could absolutely run out again. And so applicants are encouraged to consult with a professional on the budget. So whether that's a consultant that you already know you're going to work with, if you want to chat with your RPC about it, that's great. Consult with a professional on the budget, the timeline, and the scope to ensure that the proposed project is both sort of reasonable and realistic. And say, if you're applying for $100,000, you only need $80,000. The sooner we know that, the better. And if that's right up front in the application, that's even better so that we can really spread this money out the best we can. Stipends are available for volunteers who participate in Housing Academy, which Sue mentioned. So this is just a way to honor, we know, your volunteer members on your planning board, your volunteer elected officials, your volunteers on your housing committee. who are taking the time to come to Housing Academy, which is amazing. We love that and we want to encourage that. And so we're offering stipends to volunteers who participate. They're not available to, say, municipal staff who participate in a Housing Academy, while you're also invited and encouraged to attend, just to kind of honor that time. However, in this next iteration of the HOP grant, don't include those in your budget. We're going to handle that in a separate process. So that's for those of you who already have a HOP grant. I think I have one more slide. Choosing a consultant. So this is very similar to how we handled it last time, and a lot of you are already working with a consultant that you worked with on the first round of the HOP grants, and you're really happy with them, and you might want to work with them again, and that's great. Grantees may contract with their regional planning commission, or they can select from the pre-approved list of qualified consultants, which is also available on that website. That's nhopgrants.org/consultants, or you can just go over to nhopgrants.org and find the consultants button. Alternatively, grantees may undertake a competitive process to identify a consultant. That's something that many of you might be required to do per your own sort of procurement standards. As a grant condition, though, so if you choose someone through your RFQ or your RFP who is not on the approved list, we're going to ask that as a grant condition, the steering committee reserves the right to assess the qualifications of any consultant that's not included on that list. So if you're a consultant who wants to be added to the list, or you'd like to work with a consultant who's not already on the pre-approved list, you can find their request for qualifications. The consultant can submit their qualifications, and then we can get them added to the list after the steering committee has an opportunity to review. So the pre-approved list and the RFQ can also be found on that webpage. You can find the list of consultants, or if you're a consultant and you want to be added, you can go find that RFQ and submit your qualifications. There is no local match required. I saw that one question in the chat. This is my last slide. So if anybody has specific questions about how to apply, you can drop those questions in the chat, or you can send them via email, and I'll try to respond even as the presentation keeps going. And yes, stipend for Housing Academy is $250 per volunteer. We don't have any way of sort of tracking, making sure that volunteer showed up for all 4 sessions. And so it's really like an honor thing. All right. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Tiffany.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay. So a little bit, this is just briefly about the actual process of our steering committee evaluating and, making those award decisions. So we've mentioned this date several times, but applications are due no later than September 30th, 2024. And what we'll be doing is in October, our steering committee members will be individually reviewing every application and scoring them utilizing the scoring criteria, which I will speak a little bit more about, but it's also noted in the application materials. So it's all very transparent. And then in November, we'll be coming together as a steering committee, where as a group, we will review those scores, have our discussions, and make final award decisions. As I believe Sarah noted early on, there is a slight benefit, I suppose, to being a previous grantee, and that is that we'll be first reviewing and making decisions on awards for those applications that are from previous HOP grant awardees. And after that time, we'll review all other applications and be making those award decisions. So I hope that makes sense. And we will continue to make award decisions until all the money has been allocated, or that's what we're anticipating, because we're anticipating a very competitive grant round, considering how the first one went. I don't think there will be any dollars left on the table, but I guess we'll see. And then in December, those notice of awards will go out, and all applicants will be notified. And the projects that you're proposing then will actually, if you're awarded, be able to begin in late December, January, and that project can continue through September of 2026. Can't advance my own slides, you guys. Okay. So the scoring criteria, this is in all the application materials. And you'll notice that really Sarah even mentioned it in a way, because these are the sections in the narrative of the application. So these are on the left where you see housing challenge and project goals, outcomes and deliverables, readiness, community engagement, scope of work and budget. Those are the things you'll directly be telling us about in your application. Each of those sections or areas of criteria will be up to 20 points. And then we have a little bit more of a description there of what it is our steering committee will be looking for. Again, this is all in the application materials. So we just want to make sure that everyone is aware of it and knows, what our steering committee will be looking at and what we'll be using for our discussion as a group. And at the very bottom, we just kind of added that note that if you were previous/current, since people are still finishing up, HOP grantee, that there will be consideration to basically previous performance. How did the initial award go, the grant, and so that is something that will also be up for discussion with the steering committee. Lastly, I know I've already stated this, but in a different format, here is the timeline. So we're here today, July 24th. We're going to be repeating this session August 13th. So if you're here today, there's no need to join us in August. But if you had folks from your community who are interested, perhaps, that's a day that they can register for that and join us for all the same slides, all the same information, but we just want to make sure we're able to communicate to as many people as possible. The deadline for applying, September 30th, and then you have the evaluation period taking place over the course of October, November, and notice of awards in December. And there's a note at the bottom that any project that is awarded must be completed no later than September 30th, 2026. Some current grantees may know that there were a few atypical extensions that were approved by the steering committee for current grantees, but that will not be the case for this second round of funding, because these are ARPA funds and there's a lot more restriction on that September date. And so that's just very important for people to know. For more information, and we're still going to stay on and answer questions, but there's the HOP website, nhhopgrants.org. That's our email, info@nhhopgrants.org. That goes to myself, Alyssa, Sarah, and George. That way we're not at risk of missing an email. And then Sue, if you had questions about Housing Academy or community engagement or anything along those lines, there's Sue's information at UNH Cooperative Extension. The image on the right is the actual homepage for nhhopgrants.org. And do we have any questions before we kind of formally, was there any questions about anything I said before we move into full Q&A? Oh, I do see a couple questions. Not necessarily for me, but how about at this point, if our speakers, do you guys want to, as you will, unmute and see, Tara's question, will there be contract language to preclude the town from paying the same consultant to do grant administration with the 5% for small towns?
So I think the answer, to try to make it clear, was that part of it in terms of the grant administration, when towns were presenting it, there was all, different kinds of invoices for food, for copies, for whatever. So we were trying to make that simple. And so you just automatically get 5%. I think what Tara's getting at, and we saw a lot of consultants that part of their consultant fee was managing the grant program or some other aspects. Even community engagement, which we thought was going to be kind of a town function. So that's why you'll see in the budget, it's like consultant, technical assistance, consultant, community engagement, and then non-consultant. So if a consultant is doing a lot of administration, like copying and doing all that stuff, those are acceptable expenses for the consultant to put in there. So we wouldn't be having contract language that bars that action. And I'm hoping that explains it. And if anybody else wants to chime in on that, please do.
No, I think that was a good description.
Yeah, I
For
think
the
it had a good question on the housing academy or community engagement. And I think we, Sarah did sort of touch on that. We in the first round, we wanted you to put in what your community engagement, and we knew that for many people, that term was foreign, or maybe they just thought it was a couple of meetings. And so I think, and again, just to say, I think it's sort of the commitment to, I think Sarah did a good job asking, or answering. It's really like what do you know about community engagement? Just thinking about how are we going to make sure we're engaging the community and reaching out to our populations, and maybe not the same 20 people or whatever. And we realized that it's not going to be a fully fleshed out deal because indeed you'll have the access to, and even before you submit your application, you have access to Sue and her team to kind of talk that through a little bit more. So we're trying to provide a lot of that opportunity to kind of clarify those things. So feel free to reach out for more clarity or to seek out some help as you try to fill out that section.
Yeah, George, I just want to emphasize that, and I hope that that answer was enough in the chat. But I think the idea is really that you're sort of showing some understanding of why engagement is important in your process, and what you might be thinking about based on your past history in your community. And that's going to look a little different in every community. But the full understanding is that, you're going to probably maybe add and change some things based on what you're learning, and also some examples you might see in other communities that inspire you as we go through some of the training. But you can definitely reach out, as Sarah has said, about questions after this session, or if you have more specific questions, if you're thinking about something. We're not going to write that section for you. We're not going to give you exactly a template because it's going to look different in every community. But if you just want to bounce ideas off of one of us, as you're thinking about it, what you might do for engagement, myself and some of our team are happy to connect with you. So reach out to us after.
And I know, Sarah and others doing a good job answering questions in the chat, so they're there. But I do want to lift up that we're and its answer, well, the question was around paying for food and stuff. Is that, where is that administration? And I think when you look in the application, when we talk about administration, it's sort of like some copying, printing, truly administrative stuff. And I know that could blend into community engagement, but if you're like doing something that's food and you're doing a lot of posters and that's community engagement, there's no right or wrong answer there, but I think you're probably better off putting it under community engagement if truly you're going to be buying food for an event that's community engagement, or maybe you need to spend some money to rent out a hall. But the administration is really like, who's the person putting a report together, submitting the invoices, doing some of that stuff, and it's sort of a nod to that kind of work. So just wanted to put a little bit more of a finer point on the answer that was already there.
And there was another question. Sarah is doing a good job of answering these, but just for anyone who might be on a cell phone or something, driving across the state right now, someone asked about being a representative of a non-municipality, and can they attend Housing Academy, or is it only for the awardees? And the biggest issue we have with Housing Academy is space constraints, which Sarah noted in her answer. So most likely it will be limited to the awardees only. But in the chance that we do have more space, we have sometimes opened up because we know there's a lot of interest. And I know UNH is looking at, where can Housing Academy go from here, beyond this grant, because there is so much interest in it. But that's a really great question. I'm like scrolling through. in terms of the application, looking at the criteria list and then looking at Housing Champions with its own criteria and related goals. Okay, so there's a question basically a little bit about how like Housing Champions and this program, the criteria and the goals, like how they're related, and if anyone can say more about that. And I don't know if George, do you want to say more about that, or I believe.
I will say just a little that we're just realizing that, there is a criteria for becoming a housing champion, and the program rules, I guess they're up, but I think, as I heard from Noah, there might be still some finer points. And that's where we're sort of saying, if you're working on land use regulations to make housing happen more in your town, that should be a positive aspect for you trying to meet the criteria for housing champions. I know that Noah is on this call, and I would invite him, if he wishes to answer, if someone can find him and unmute him, if you're willing to do that. Maybe nod your head or turn your camera on, and there he is. Do you want to speak to that, Noah?
Sure. Thank you, George. Noah Hodges, I'm a principal planner in the Office of Planning and Development at BEA. Yeah, so I think, as George said, the finer points still need to be worked out. The rules did just get approved last week by the Joint Legislative Committee of Administrative Rules. But I think the larger idea is that, we don't want, on the one hand, you to be working on a HOP grant over here, which is totally disconnected from, if you want to go through the Housing Champion certification process. And the idea is that your HOP grant would, in some way kind of be consistent with the other activities you might be doing to become a Housing Champion certified community if your city or town were to go that route. The application and kind of the formal checklist and criteria beyond what is in the RSAs has not been published by BEA yet, but more on that. I would expect to see more on that in the next few months. Sorry, that's kind of all I have to say at this point.
Thanks, Noah.
Great, thanks. I know this going back to this admin stuff is going back with Sarah and Tara. And I want to be sensitive that there might be some real issues with really small towns, but we have to have somebody on a town actively engaged doing something. If there's nobody that's able to do anything, that's a concern of ours, where the consultant is just writing the reports, doing the invoicing. So I guess we could, I feel like it might be very, not a huge deal, but I think, and Sarah said, there's, we've got a lot of towns where the planning board chair is putting the reports in, or they have a role in okaying expenses, so the town administrator or whomever knows what to do. And that has to exist, and that also pops up, I think, for me, in readiness. There's got to be a plan where it's not the consultant just driving that, because we've seen sometimes that's not really working well, that a town is not really even sure what is going on. And I'm not saying that's what you're bringing up, but there's got to be a way to make that work where the town is involved.
Right. If I can echo and add to that a little bit, the successful HOP grantees that we've seen are ones where the town, whether it's the planning board or a housing committee or commission or someone else, has some sort of ownership over the program. And so we want to avoid feeling like we're seeing that the consultant is leading and driving the entire project and the town is just sort of there. They're along for the ride, but are not kind of like, especially the community engagement part, and they're not owning it, because we want to make sure that after this project is over and that consultant's no longer working with the community, that like the local leadership in that community, whether it's volunteer or staff, have built a foundation that they can continue to build off of into the future. This grant program is little, like at the end of the day, we're giving you $100,000 and you're doing one project, but we want to make sure that it builds for like greater success into the future, makes conversations about housing easier in the future, and is a little bit of like a launching pad for more activities in the future.
Yeah, and I think under the, we didn't go through all the detail, but I'm hoping all of you, if you haven't done so already or have opened up the application, there's a lot of points, as Sarah had pointed out earlier, under readiness, and that's going to be a key area. And she's just said it, what do you see in terms of, local leadership and their willingness to roll up their sleeves. And that's why we're encouraging you to, in your one PDF application, by the way, to, put in those kinds of things that sort of demonstrate that there's a real sort of planning, coordination, commitment about getting the job done, working with the consultant, but not just having the consultant be the main driver. Because in the end, the town has to, as we know, vote on things. If it's master plan, has to be involved in that.
Are there any other questions that people want to throw into the chat, or unmute yourself and we'll go wild, wild west for a second? We still have about 15 minutes if people have more questions. One thing I did want to note, because we do keep kind of referencing the $100,000, and just a note that it's up to $100,000. And I think we've had awards as small as 12,000. I believe our average award has been around 50. So a lot of communities are doing some great work, for $35,000 or whatnot. So when you are putting that budget together, like Sarah had mentioned, the steering committee will be looking to see that it's, that it seems realistic, that a consultant has possibly consulted on the pricing and what things are going to cost, and that every single application isn't just like, yeah, we need $100,000. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, like what you're trying to accomplish and how many deliverables and how big your community is probably all going to play a factor into what your request will actually be. And since we do have a couple minutes, I can open up the website. If you haven't already, this is the website for the program. If you haven't already looked at it, and here's, information for anyone that wants to register for August for this session. When you go on the website, you'll see, here, let me move my gallery for a second. Okay, you'll see like the HOP Awards tab, Housing Academy, current grantees, and then a little bit more about the program and, the contact form, but you know how to contact us now. And so from here, like if you were to click the HOP Awards, you would actually see a little bit about this session, and then some information, just kind of some of the summary information we just gave you all. Here's the application link right here, the budget template, which will open, you can download it as an Excel document, so that should calculate for you as you're putting in your information. Sarah mentioned the consultants. So that's where you'll find the list of qualified consultants. If there's a consultant you're really excited about who's not on this list, they can submit basically an RFQ, request for qualifications. They can respond to that, and our committee will review and add them to the list if they seem qualified. Here's some Housing Academy things, and anyone else feel free to jump in from the speakers. I'm just kind of going through and showing what it looks like. A list of our current grantees. So this is these are the communities that were represented on that map that we referenced. So a lot of communities doing a lot of great things right now. I see a couple more questions too. So
there's a question about whether or not grant communities who may have sent people to prior housing academies or who got previous grants should also include Housing Academy for the future. And I would say that's probably a little bit dependent on how many people and who went previously. So if you had a group go through it and they're all still involved, you may or may not choose to send additional people, but you would certainly be welcome to send additional people. We do have a lot of communities that have either they didn't have the opportunity to send maybe more than one person the first time, or some people may have left who were involved in the program before, or they may have new volunteers or new board members who maybe weren't part of it, and it would be valuable to them to attend. So Housing Academy is going to still be available to communities who may have already sent people, and there would be definitely value in sort of expanding that skill. As Sarah said, it's really about more than just this one project on some level. It's also about, you now have this capacity in your community for people who've had the training. So the training will be available either way.
Okay, let's see. There's a few questions coming in, and if a community's already received a HOP grant to conduct a regulatory audit or regulatory change, can they apply to go back and update the chapters of their master plan or do a housing needs assessment if they have a justification for doing so? I don't see why not, but I would allow anyone in the group. I know when we did the first round of grants, we kind of packaged things into phases, which gave, it's the idea of, okay, phase 1, then phase 2, phase 3, and we removed that piece. So it's still the same allowable activities. But I think one of the things we realize is these activities aren't always really, it's not 1, then 2, then 3 for every community, and that there is sometimes a very good reason that things are taking place in different orders. So I don't think I don't think someone would be precluded from doing what you're suggesting, Noah. I think we would want to hear that justification in the application and just really like painting the picture for the steering committee about what you've done so far, what you're proposing to do, and why it's a good time for your community to do this work.
I agree, Tiffany. And I see another question about, do we have some showcase examples of local changes, zoning and subdivision regulations coming out of this process? The short answer is yes. We internally are working with someone here, and we're working on putting out some case studies. So we've got that underway already, and we've been interviewing some of the HOP grantees that are kind of wrapping up their projects or are finished with their projects and putting together those case studies. So those will be released. They likely will not be released in time for an application for this next sort of application deadline. So they won't serve as sort of inspiration in that way, but we're happy to talk about what communities are doing because we have all of that information already. It's just not in that like beautiful case study format, but there will eventually be like a booklet with some great examples, which hopefully will benefit not just HOP grantees, but also other communities who don't have this grant but are looking for interesting ideas.
And I would add that, because I know we talked about this, that feel free to reach out to us because we'd be happy to maybe put you in touch with some people. We've had some great communities, large and small, that might be willing to just talk with you about things. So I think that's important. And I just want to circle back to the question about the justification for doing so. If you had a previous HOP grant, and I don't really have much more to add, but for anyone applying and you had already had a HOP grant, certainly number one, we're going to look at your previous HOP grant. And I guess the question might be, is you're doing it like, well, why are they doing that relative to what they already did? So just, I think the word justification is a good one, but also, connect it back if you can to sort of why you're doing that as opposed to maybe not doing another, regulatory change type of thing. And it might be like, we realize that this is a good time because of the activity that the master plan process should be done now because we've made some good changes, we've looked at barriers, and we want to put that, sort of memorialize that in a master plan. But just to be really clear and maybe connect it back to the previous activity that you did once before.
Do you want to also respond to Beth's comment, George? She's talking about how they're currently working in her community on updating their master plan, and they already have planned on doing a visioning session and more engagement over the next year. Can the HOP grant be used to assist with this? They previously had a grant for an audit, housing audit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I know that we talked a lot in the first round, like, we paying for something that someone's already doing, but we also want to recognize, well, if they're doing it in full faith, and maybe this money will help with their budget, then it seems like the intent and the commitment is there, and this money would help you get that across the finish line, or perhaps enhance it, because that grant might help with more robust community engagement. Sarah, what do you think, or Tiffany or Alyssa?
I agree. I don't see any obvious reason why not. We might ask that question of, are we funding something that's already funded with other dollars? And we might have this question about, is it duplicative? But I don't see any obvious reason based on Beth's comment.
Yeah, I think you'd want to just really be, I think it's a good point, because we did have something where it seemed like money had already been set aside, and it makes it tough, and it's gonna make that question tougher in light of the small amount of funds that we have. And that's why I keep raising it. This is it was competitive last time, but we had a rolling grant program. So it really had a different look and feel. We're going to be looking at all of these grants and scoring them, and knowing at that point how much money we have available. And so things will rise to the surface and things may not. And while we're not trying to be bureaucrats, we're going to, take your applications, and there's not going to really be any back and forth. We're going to have to take it at face value. So really, really important to explain some of that, and explain, how you were planning to do that with no funding or whatever. So.
Hey, George, I'm going to jump in just a quick sec because I wanted to follow up. Also, Beth, you asked about Housing Academy webinar. Sarah, actually, I think you're answering that right now. But if you want to reach out to us, we do have a series that's going to be running this September for originally planned for some of the provisional communities, but we could absolutely look at adding more people into that. And if you're a current grant community, we could include you in that program, but you could also just reach out to us at Extension. We have a lot of the resources from the Housing Academy series and some of our prior engagement training. So if you already have something planned that's coming up, even regardless of the grant, and you'd like some support with the engagement component, please feel free to reach out. You can shoot me an email and connect with us. And I think to George's point about work you're doing already, I think what we've looked for in the past is a really good explanation of how this work would enhance that or grow it versus have it be duplicative. So I'm happy to chat with you about your October engagement if it would be helpful.
And so I think this will be the last question we answer for this session. And so is there another orientation meeting coming up, and will it cover the same content? Yes and yes. So on August 13th, we'll be doing the same presentation from noon to 1. So if you were already here for this whole session, probably no need to attend. But if you have colleagues or other community members who would like to be on a live session, it would be wonderful for them to probably register for that. We will be posting this recording as well and sharing it with registrants and posting it to the website. So folks who aren't able to attend either session can always also watch the recordings, and hopefully that answers most questions, but people are welcome to email us at info@nhopgrants.org with any additional questions as you might be preparing your application. So I think that's everything. Do any of the other speakers want to say anything else?
Just thanks for attending and asking really excellent questions.
Yeah, absolutely. You should see an email from us in a couple days with the actual recording, but it will also go on the website too. And we can share some of the links that were shared in the chat for Housing Champions, like other kinds of resources that were shared in the chat. We'll make sure everybody has that. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.